Tell me about a time you disagreed with your manager. Introduction. This is a common behavioral interview question for software developers, backend developers, full-stack developers, senior developers, and team leads. Interviewers ask this question to understand whether you can disagree professionally, whether you respect leadership decisions, how you communicate different opinions, whether you use facts instead of emotions, how you handle conflict without damaging relationships, whether you can still commit after a final decision, quality, business needs, and delivery timelines. This question is especially important for Java developers, backend developers, Spring Boot developers, full-stack developers, senior software developers, team leads, Agile teams, engineering managers. The best way to answer this question is by using the STAR method. STAR means star. S. Situation. Explain the background. T. Task. Explain your responsibility. A. Action. Explain what you personally did. R. Result. Explain the final outcome. A good interview answer usually spends 10% situation, 10% task, 60% action, 20% result. The most important part is the action section because interviewers want to understand how you disagreed respectfully, presented your reasoning, listened to your manager, and worked toward the best outcome. Question. Tell me about a time you disagreed with your manager. Example 1. Disagreeing about releasing without enough testing situation. In one sprint, we were close to a release deadline for a new Spring Boot API. The API worked in the main Happy Path flow, but QA had not completed testing for authorization, validation errors, and edge cases. My manager wanted to move forward with the release because the deadline was important. Task. I needed to explain my concern respectfully and help the team make a safer decision. Action. I first acknowledged the business pressure. I told my manager that I understood the release date was important and that the team wanted to avoid delays. Then, I explained the technical risk clearly. The untested areas included role-based authorization, invalid request payloads, missing required fields, empty result behavior, sorting edge cases, error response format, regression impact on related APIs. I avoided saying we cannot release. Instead, I presented options. Option 1 was to release as planned with known risk. Option 2 was to delay the release slightly until QA completed the critical test cases. Option 3 was to release only the lower risk portion and keep the risky behavior behind a feature flag. I recommended the third option because it balanced delivery and safety. I also worked with QA to define the minimum critical tests needed before enabling the feature fully. Result. My manager agreed to use the feature flag approach. The release still went forward, but the risky behavior was not exposed until QA finished critical validation. We avoided a possible production issue while still meeting the business timeline. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows respectful disagreement, business pressure awareness, risk-based thinking, practical options, release judgment, collaboration with QA. Example 2. Disagreeing about a quick fix versus root cause fix situation. In one production support case, users reported intermittent errors from a backend API. The issue was urgent, and my manager suggested applying a quick workaround to reduce errors immediately. I agreed that the issue needed fast action, but I was concerned that the workaround would hide the real root cause. Task. I needed to respectfully explain why we should investigate further before applying only a temporary fix. Action. I first agreed with the goal of reducing user impact quickly. Then I reviewed the logs, correlation IDs, recent deployments, and affected request patterns. I found that the issue happened only when one optional field was missing from the request. I explained to my manager, the workaround may reduce visible errors, but the root cause is a missing edge case handling in the service logic. If we only suppress the error, we may still process some requests incorrectly. I proposed a balanced plan. Apply a focused code fix. Add null safe handling. Add regression tests. Ask QA to validate the affected scenario. Monitor logs after deployment. Avoid unrelated refactoring during the hotfix. This plan was still fast, but safer than hiding the error. Result: my manager agreed with the focused root cause fix. The issue was resolved quickly. The regression tests prevented the same issue from returning. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows: check, production maturity, respectful pushback, root cause thinking, urgency awareness, safe hotfix approach, accountability. Example 3. Disagreeing about returning all records from an API situation. In one project, we were designing a customer search API. The initial expectation was to return all matching records to keep the front-end implementation simple. My manager preferred the simpler approach because the first release had a tight timeline. Task: I needed to explain why returning all records could create performance and scalability problems. Action: I first understood my manager's concern. The team wanted to move quickly and avoid adding unnecessary complexity. Then I explained the technical risk returning all records could cause. Check: large response payloads, slow API response time, browser performance issues, database load, timeout risk, poor scalability, difficult production support later. I proposed a practical alternative: use pagination with a default page size and maximum page size. I explained that pagination was already a standard pattern in our application, so it would not add too much complexity. I also shared a sample response structure with pagination metadata. The API would include: page number, page size, total records, total pages, result, list. Result: my manager agreed to add pagination from the first version. The API performed better with larger data. Front-end integration remained clear because the pagination contract was documented early. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows technical judgment, performance awareness, respect for delivery pressure, practical compromise, API design maturity, scalability thinking. Example 4. Disagreeing about skipping documentation situation. In one sprint, we delivered a backend feature with several API changes. Because the team was busy, my manager suggested that we could update documentation later. I understood the time pressure, but I was concerned that QA and front-end developers would not have enough information for testing and integration. Task: I needed to explain why documentation was important, without sounding like I was slowing down delivery. Action: I first agreed that we should avoid unnecessary documentation. Then I explained that this was not a large document. It was a small API handoff note that would save time. The missing information included request fields, response fields, validation errors, authorization rules, sample request JSON, sample response JSON, error response examples, impacted flows. I proposed creating a lightweight API note instead of a long document. The note would take less time, but help QA and front-end teams immediately. I created the first version myself and shared it with QA and front-end developers. Result: the documentation reduced repeated questions during testing. Front-end integration was smoother. My manager agreed that small, practical documentation was worth the time for API changes. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows practical disagreement, practical documentation judgment, team productivity focus, avoiding over-documentation, front-end and QA support, delivery awareness. Example 5. Disagreeing about scope during a sprint situation. In one sprint, the product owner requested additional functionality for a report feature after development had already started. My manager wanted to include the change in the same sprint to satisfy the business team. I understood the business need, but the added scope affected backend calculation logic, QA testing, and front-end changes. Task: I needed to explain the delivery risk and suggest a better way to handle the scope change. Action: I reviewed the new request and identified what it impacted. The additional scope affected calculation logic, date range filtering, time zone handling, database query, front-end display, QA test data, regression testing, acceptance criteria. I explained to my manager that adding it immediately could put the original sprint goal at risk. Instead of simply saying no, I proposed options. Option 1, add everything now and accept delivery risk. Option 2, finish the original committed scope and create a follow-up story. Option 3, include a small part of the request now and move the rest to the next sprint. I recommended option 3 because it gave the business some value without risking the whole feature. Result: my manager agreed to split the added scope. The team delivered the original feature on time and included the highest value part of the new request. The remaining work was planned properly for the next sprint. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows: scope management, business empathy, respectful disagreement, practical options, agile planning, delivery protection. Example 6. Disagreeing about technical debt priority situation. In one application, we had a large service class that contained validation, business logic, mapping, repository calls, and external API calls. My manager wanted the team to focus only on new feature work because there were business deadlines. I agreed that features were important, but I believed the growing technical debt was slowing every future change. Task: I needed to explain the technical debt risk in business terms and suggest a practical approach. Action: I avoided presenting technical debt as only a developer preference. Instead, I showed how it affected delivery. The large service class caused: check, slower development, harder code review, more regression risk, duplicated logic, difficult unit testing, longer onboarding, more defects during changes. I proposed a small, incremental refactor instead of a large rewrite. The plan was: refactor only the area touched by the next feature, add tests first, separate validation logic, keep behavior unchanged, avoid delaying committed work, document the new pattern. This approach allowed us to reduce technical debt gradually while still delivering features. Result: my manager agreed to the incremental refactoring approach. Future changes in that area became easier. The team improved maintainability without stopping feature delivery. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows: check, technical debt communication, business impact framing, practical compromise, incremental improvement, maintainability focus. Example 7. Disagreeing about production deployment timing situation. In one release, we had a backend change ready to deploy late in the day. My manager wanted to proceed because the release had already been delayed once. I was concerned because the change touched shared validation logic, and support coverage would be lower after hours. Task: I needed to respectfully raise the risk and suggest a safer deployment window. Action: I first acknowledged the frustration around the delayed release. Then I explained the risk clearly. The concerns were: shared validation logic changed, multiple APIs could be affected, lower support coverage after hours, limited QA availability, harder rollback coordination, reduced monitoring attention. I suggested deploying the next morning when developers, QA, DevOps, and support were available. I also proposed using the extra time to prepare. Smoke test checklist, rollback plan, monitoring checks, affected API list, QA validation scenarios. Result: my manager agreed to move the deployment to the next morning. The deployment went smoothly. Because the team was available, smoke testing and monitoring were completed quickly. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows: check, release judgment, production risk awareness, respectful communication, safer deployment planning, monitoring mindset, stakeholder protection. Example 8. Disagreeing about building a custom solution situation. In one project, we needed to generate simple reports in PDF format. My manager initially suggested building a custom PDF generation utility to have full control. I understood the desire for flexibility, but I was concerned that building everything ourselves would take longer and create maintenance risk. Task. I needed to evaluate the options and explain why using a mature library might be a better approach. Action. I compared both options. A custom solution would provide control, but it had risks. Cons. More development time. Cons. More testing effort. Cons. More formatting bugs. Cons. Difficult maintenance. Cons. Limited future support. Using a mature library would provide faster implementation, tested functionality, better formatting support, less custom code, easier maintenance, documentation and community examples. I prepared a short comparison and recommended using a library while keeping our wrapper simple. The wrapper would allow us to change the implementation later if needed. My manager agreed with the library-based approach. We delivered the PDF feature faster. The code remained maintainable because our application was not tightly coupled to the library. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows technical evaluation, respectful disagreement, build versus buy thinking, maintainability awareness, delivery focus, practical architecture. Best short answer version. If you need a short interview answer, you can say, in one project, we were designing a customer search API. My manager initially preferred returning all matching records because it would be simpler for the first release and easier for the front-end team. I understood the goal of keeping the first version simple, but I was concerned about performance and scalability. I explained that returning all records could create large response payloads, slow API response time, browser performance issues, database load, and timeout risk as data grew. Instead of just disagreeing, I proposed a practical alternative, adding pagination with a default page size and maximum page size. I also shared a sample response structure with pagination metadata, so the front-end team could integrate clearly. My manager agreed with the approach. The API performed better with larger data. The front-end contract was clear, and we avoided a production performance risk while still keeping the implementation manageable. Common mistakes to avoid. 1. Making your manager look wrong. Bad answer. My manager did not understand the technical issue. Better answer. My manager was focused on delivery speed, and I shared the technical risks so we could make a balanced decision. 2. Disagreeing emotionally. Bad answer. I strongly argued because I knew my approach was better. Better answer. I explained my concern using examples, risks, and options. 3. Only saying no. Bad answer. I told my manager we should not do it. Better answer. I explained the risk and proposed a practical alternative. 4. Ignoring business pressure. Bad answer. I only cared about the technical solution. Better answer. I understood the business timeline and suggested a compromise that balanced delivery and quality. 5. Not supporting the final decision. Bad answer. I disagreed, but they chose their way, so I stepped back. Better answer. After the final decision, I supported the plan professionally and helped deliver it. Best practices for answering this question. Check. Use the STAR method. Choose a professional disagreement. Avoid blaming or criticizing your manager. Explain your manager's perspective fairly. Use facts, examples, and risks. Propose options, not just objections. Stay respectful. Show collaboration. Support the final decision. End with a positive result. What interviewers are looking for. Interviewers want to see whether you can disagree respectfully, communicate with leadership, use evidence, understand business priorities, handle conflict maturely, propose practical alternatives, collaborate after disagreement. For senior roles, they also want to see check technical judgment, check stakeholder management, risk communication, influence without authority, balancing quality and delivery, production awareness, leadership maturity. Strong words to use in your answer. You can use words like respectfully raised, explained the risk, acknowledged the business need, proposed options, compared trade-offs, aligned, collaborated, supported the decision, balanced speed and quality, reduced risk, reached agreement. Example: I respectfully raised my concern, acknowledged the delivery pressure, explained the technical risk with examples, proposed a lower risk alternative, and worked with my manager to choose a balanced approach. Good manager disagreement topics you can use. Depending on your experience, you can talk about: check, releasing without enough testing; quick fix versus root cause fix, returning all records instead of pagination; skipping documentation; adding scope during a sprint; technical debt priority; late day production deployment; building custom solution versus using library; skipping regression testing; disabling monitoring alerts; merging a risky pull request; delaying a hotfix for proper QA; feature flag versus full release; synchronous API versus Kafka event; short-term workaround versus proper fix. Final summary. Tell me about a time you disagreed with your manager is an important interview question because companies want developers who can communicate concerns professionally without creating conflict. The best answer should include what the disagreement was about, why your manager had that view, what concern you had, how you explained your reasoning, what options you proposed, how you stayed respectful, what final decision was made, how you supported the outcome. Good examples include: check, release testing concern; quick fix versus root cause fix; pagination decision; documentation decision; sprint scope disagreement; technical debt priority; deployment timing; custom solution versus library. The strongest answers show respect, evidence-based communication, business awareness, practical alternatives, and professional maturity.